Today's Tuesday, August 28, 2018. It's a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Sobroff, Bonner, Figueroa Villa are present, and we have a quorum.
Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners, it's a special meeting to us because we want to welcome Dale Bonner to your first meeting as Commissioner. We're honored and happy to have you here, sir. Okay, great. We'll start with consent calendar items. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar items?
We do, sir. I have a card for 1A for Michael Novick, and I believe there's cards coming up.
Mr. Novick.
Item 1A is a proposal that you accept a donation of $150 from the student body at Abram Freeman Occupational Center
Yeah.
to benefit the cadet program at Newton. And I taught at Abram Freeman Occupational Center for about 15 years. I retired from there as a teacher. And, I always complain about the money you accept from the foundations and particularly the Police Foundation and from the Dodgers. But I think it's outrageous that you're taking money from the students at Abram Freeman Occupational Center who are, in general, poor, working class people, black and brown, immigrants, Asians. And I urge you to say thank you, but no thank you, and send the money back so they can use it for much better purposes.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments on 1A?
We have Mr. Herman.
Okay, Herman? Do we have any on 1B?
We have Mr. Herman on 1B.
Okay. Herman, 1A and 1B, sir.
For the record, it's Mr. Herman, sir. Sobra. Get it straight. So when you're dealing with scumbags for the Abram Fieldman Occupational Center, which I attend with students, and these students are not gay, they're disabled. Being gay is not a disability. Being homosexual is not a disability.
You're off topic.
President,
This
he's
is
off
about
topic.
a
Sir, hold
monetary.
on.
This is
I'm
gonna be a
dealing
short
with the
one.
occupational school. Why
going.
are you shutting it down so fast?
Keep
See?
going.
So when you're again donating only $150,000,
It's $150.
that's it. $150 don't buy shit nowadays. It won't buy a fucking thing for these students, and Mr. Boner Dale knows it. He knows what it's like to see people of color discriminated against at the occupational center. Because the majority there are like myself, a homeless, stupid motherfucker trying to get a job, trying to get a certificate, trying to get state qualified so I could say under 42 USC, fuck Steve Sobroff.
Okay, so let's go to number B now. Mr.
Is that 2B?
No, 1B.
Oh, 1B.
Yeah.
Dated August 24th, regarding the Los Angeles Dodgers, LLC, a reminder of the LA Cadet Program. It's not to be abusive to children, as the Archdiocese has been reported for sexual misconduct. In these cadet programs, there is also sexual misconduct.
Off topic.
It's dealing with the cadets, Sobroff.
No, this is about a
Some of the
about a
cadets are
donation.
gay. Some of the cadets are men. Some of the cadets are women.
Last
I'm on
warning.
fucking topic.
Last warning.
So, such organizations like the Dodgers have a history of drawing in our children to their programs, but they never get a job. They never get a fucking job to work
President,
with the
he's off
Dodgers.
topic.
Off topic. Okay, let's go to number 2A,
Who the
please.
fuck is T-Fang? I got a minute left.
You can sit
He-
down.
he's not the
This is
chair.
your
You're
final
the
warning,
chair.
or I'm going to ask that you be escorted out of the room.
Fucking not the chair. I got the floor.
Would you guys escort Mr. Herman out of the room, please?
That's a violation of the Brown Act.
Okay,
You
we'll
know
see you
that,
later.
Sobroff? Fuck you.
See you later.
Fucking racist Jew motherfucker. You are, Sobroff. I have a minute left.
We're on 2A.
You need a motion for 1A and 1B, sir.
Oh, we have a motion for 1A and 1B. We have all those in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay.
And please let the record reflect Commissioner Goldsmith is now present.
Okay. Just let him go.
Mr. President, for the record, Mr. Herman continues to disrupt the meeting while he's being escorted out of the room.
I don't know if there's any ways that we can keep Mr. Herman from coming into the meetings because of what he's doing now, but I'd like to find out. Okay, let's take a deep breath and go to 2A.
Item 2A, Inspector General's Report dated August 28, 2018, relative to the review of arrests for violations of California Penal Code Section 148A1.
Good morning, Commissioners, and welcome to Commissioner Bonner. Mark Smith, Inspector General. With me today are Police Special Investigators Camelia Naguib and Alexa Daniels, the co-authors of the report that we are presenting to you this morning. Just by way of a brief introduction, the OIG is, I think, always looking for areas of the department to audit, to report on, to evaluate for potential improvement, particularly those that have impact to the community. One of those areas most certainly is all kinds of stops that are conducted by officers, pedestrian stops, vehicle stops, and so on. And toward the end of last year, which was prior to my arrival, staff, I think, notably recognized a need to look at this area through the lens of 148 PC arrests, or what is commonly referred to as resisting arrest. We felt this was a unique way to look at interactions with individuals and see how the department was doing, particularly because where a 148 charge is the sole or leading charge for an arrest, it gives an interesting opportunity to see exactly what occurred during that interaction where the person who was being arrested is indicated to have been resisting or obstructing or delaying the officer, if there isn't any other charge beyond that. When we looked at these arrests, we did so in sort of both a qualitative and a quantitative nature. OIG is often equipped to do both types of audits. This one, I would argue, leans a little more toward the qualitative side of things. The co-authors of the report in just a moment will let you know about how we did our selection sample. But what we really wanted to do is look at all aspects of these interactions to see if there's room for improvement. For instance, were the actual elements of the penal code met before these arrests were made? Were there post-stop activities that caused us any concern? And with direction from this commission, we all wanted to look specifically as well at issues of procedural justice during these types of interactions. We wanted to look specifically at these interactions occurring within the homeless community. And so those were the things that sort of guided us as we figured out how to look through this lens of 148 arrests. As I mentioned, the deep dive that we did was mostly a qualitative one. We often found that in the bulk of cases we looked at, somewhere in the ballpark of 2/3, there are not identifiable issues that caused us concern, and that is to the credit of the department. Sometimes these incidents had more information for us than at other times. They might have video where we could corroborate what officers were saying, and that always helped us, and sometimes they didn't. But in about 2/3 of the events that we looked at, we did not find areas of concern, and we were pleased to see that. Our report does spend most of its time focusing on the other 1/3 for the simple reason that we thought that's where we could have the most effect in trying to suggest improvements for the department. And in those 1/3 of cases, some of the things that we found were more minor concerns, and some were more serious. But we tried to lay out those in great detail and give global suggestions to the department in the form of numbered recommendations that we think can address those issues that we found. It's always a search for continuous improvement. It's not lost on us either that these 148 arrests during the time of the consent decree were called out for additional scrutiny because they're historically known to have concerns as far as their justification goes. So we were cognizant of that as we went forward as well. That's kind of the background and the guise in which we undertook this project. I'm just going to turn it over to the co-authors of the report, who will do a little bit more detail in how we selected the cases we selected and why. And as I mentioned, we came up with a set of global recommendations that we think can improve that third of cases where we had issues. They'll run through what those recommendations were for you as well, and then we'll take
Before
any
the staff
questions.
responds, would it be appropriate for us to give some of our questions so as the staff responds, they can deal directly with those?
Whichever way,
Is that okay?
whichever way you
with
prefer.
guys? Okay. And before we do that, there's a statement in that most of the recommendations, in fact, all of the recommendations have been discussed with the department and the department has been accepting of most of the recommendations. I found this to be a really interesting audit that went pretty deep, and I think can be very helpful. I'm interested in the parts of it where the department felt like maybe it wasn't, the recommendations weren't exactly as the department felt that they should be. And before we get into that, I'm interested, Chief, you've read this, your comments and thoughts about the recommendations and process and the results.
Thank you, Commissioner President. The department has worked extensively with the Office of Inspector General. We're thankful for that opportunity. I think that these deep dive examinations into our practices, in this instance, the instances in which we exercise the enforcement of 148 of the Penal Code, resisting interfering, offers opportunities for all of us to ensure that our policies, our procedures, our protocols, our training are what we expect, and then when they fall short or there's areas for improvement, that we identify them quickly and ensure that the set of recommendations going forward are workable, and that's something that is going to continue to improve department operations. So we're very satisfied with this report. We believe that it strikes the right tenor and tone, and I also think it know that it identifies areas that we continue to that continued work will benefit our performance. This is an area of interactions that our officers very seldom have to resort to. For the vast majority of instances in which officers are engaged in enforcement actions, investigating crimes, making arrests, taking actions, they're able to gain the willful compliance of individuals, those being those that are witnesses, but as well as offenders. There are instances in which, however, a simple encounter of a consensual encounter that turns into a detention, or something that starts as a detention moves into a scenario where the conduct of the individual that we're attempting to have this detention with begins to delay, interfere, or obstruct the officer's lawful ability to perform their duty, and in the public's expectation that that those individuals who are detained cooperate is not just a good idea, it's a matter of law. And yet, at the same time, ensuring that our officers' tone and their tenor in those engagements are constantly looking to de-escalate and find the ability to gain the willful compliance and cooperation of even an offender whose this investigation may lead to their arrest and incarceration is a point that, again, I'm proud of the work our men and women do in achieving, and when we fall short, I see those as opportunities for us to improve.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any just opening or questions that you have that the staff can respond, and we can always come back, Commissioner?
Thank you, President. Yeah, well, I want to just appreciate this incredibly thorough report. It's a long time coming. I know you've been working on it for over a year, is that right? Very, very thorough, and I appreciate working so closely with me to make sure that it incorporates all of my feedback and suggestions over time, and also appreciate the hard work that you've done with the department, and thank you, Chief Moore, for saying what you did and really validating that the OIG did, in fact, coordinate closely with you, and appreciate your proactive approach to many of these issues, even before this report came out, and your openness to continuing to improve, as you always are. Of course, positive to see, about 2/3 of these cases, officers are doing what they're supposed to do, but concerned to see about 1/3 where we want to see improvements on a number of fronts. And I'm particularly interested in this, as others have said, because of the potential for abuse and potential for bias to come into play. And certainly this report does show that there's a disproportionate impact on people of color, on Black people in particular, Black men in particular, and that there's particularly concerning issues with regard to the practice of 148 with people who are experiencing homelessness and people who are having mental health issues. We're seeing an increased incidence of use of force, and perhaps not taking full advantage of opportunities for de-escalation. So I think a number of issues have been raised. That's the purpose of these reports, both to show what the department is doing well and where we can improve, and do think it's a useful lens in terms of looking at the Fourth Amendment and procedural justice in particular. So I would be interested in having both the OIG and the department kind of respond to the issues I've just raised that are particularly important to me, as well as any others that the commissioners are concerned about. And then I'll have some additional remarks after that.
Sandy, do you have any questions Commissioner Bonner?
I would just add, during the course of the discussion, there was a section, I think, on page 6 of the report that breaks down the 148 arrests by area division, so I'd just like to hear some discussion of that as well.
Okay. And I had a question, learning moment. I didn't know that, is it really true that pedestrians are not restricted to crossings and traversing a street but may cross it at any point? So there really is no such thing as jaywalking unless you're blocking a car or something? Can I walk
This
across the
is
street?
one of the most
though, so-
interesting things about this report. I agree. You should.
The only way I can get to the Senor Fish here is by walking across the street without, am I okay to do that?
No, if you cross the street in the middle, when you have two controlled intersections on both ends, that would be considered jaywalking.
Controlled by a traffic signal in particular.
Correct. If one of those intersections is not signal controlled, so then it would not be considered jaywalking. However, it is a terminology that most people often use when they do cross the street between two intersections. They think, like you do, that it's illegal and it's jaywalking. So it's a common use term.
Okay. Thanks. I have other questions, but I'm going to go ahead.
Most controversial element of the report.
Most pressing right now. Okay.
Just one thing, but I don't want to steal my staff's thunder, but of course, as I try not to do, I'm sure made the same mistake. President Sobroff, you reminded me of this, something I should have said in my opening remarks. This report was influenced by direction from this commission, which was extremely helpful and got it focused on some of the issues that I think we really needed to focus on. We had input from the ACLU, which was helpful to us in forming up some of our recommendations. And as was said a couple times already, we had, I would say, extensive meetings with the department, which were both productive, helpful. They actually included some past experiences and successes in dealing with problematic 148 arrests previously in years past, and made suggestions to us that we incorporated into our final recommendations. So to say they're helpful would be an understatement. It was a good process to learn that. We stand by the conclusions that we reached, but the report was made only better with the input of all of those groups, this commission, ACLU, and heavy meetings with the department, which we certainly appreciated.
Great. Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good
Morning.
morning. Alexa Daniels with the Office of the Inspector General. This morning, I would just like to provide a brief overview of how we conducted the review, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague, Camelia Naguib, to discuss the findings and the recommendations. So for this report, we reviewed violations of California Penal Code Section 148, specifically subdivision A1. This makes it a misdemeanor for a person to willfully resist, delay, or obstruct an officer in the performance of his or her official duties. So this covers a lot of different types of conduct, but some examples include refusing to provide information during a detention, physically resisting handcuffing, or fleeing from a detention when officers have detained a person. So, as has been mentioned by multiple people now, historically this charge has been seen as being vulnerable to abuse, and because of this, the consent decree provided for heightened scrutiny of these arrests. This increased attention to these arrests continues to, even after the end of the consent decree, and today watch commanders are required to review these arrests prior to booking. And this is to determine whether there are any issues or concerns related to training, policy, or tactics present in the incident. As you can see in the report, our review sample was selected from all the 148 arrests that occurred during a 10-month period from June 2016 to March 2017. And as the Inspector General mentioned, this was where 148 was the primary charge for that arrest. And we would note 148 can accompany other serious charges, but we chose to focus the review on incidents where it was the primary charge so that we really could zero in on the basis for making this arrest under this violation. So we narrowed our sample. We included only those arrests that were made by officers who were assigned to divisions or areas equipped with video so that we could have a more complete view of what occurred during the incident.
Point on that. when we assigned officers, because a number of officers didn't have videos, so you didn't deal with those. So
Correct.
these numbers may be skewed a little bit based on where we assigned the video first, which different divisions have different demographics and characteristics.
Yes, sir. This
Okay.
this is not a representation. It's not a representative sample of the whole
Okay,
department.
okay, which is important.
And you can see in that chart that was referenced on page 6, we wanted to make clear which divisions did not have video at the time. This is sort of a shortcut, so that you can see we had areas from all bureaus, but just different representations of some more divisions or more areas in some bureaus than others.
Commissioner Sarbat, this is also why I mentioned previously, we try to lean this a little more towards a qualitative review than a pure quantitative one, and that was one of the purposes, so we could do a little bit more picking and choosing, but we understand the consequences of that as well.
Okay, it's just an important footnote because your results are not pure based on your sample.
It's a representation of what we found from the cases we looked at.
Got it.
So we also narrowed our sample to incidents that stem from an officer-initiated contact rather than a radio call. And the purpose of this was really to zero in on some of the Fourth Amendment issues that we were looking at. Also, part of this review, we conducted a review of the department's training in Fourth Amendment issues to see sort of what's the foundation for officers in terms of when they go out into the field and are making these determinations. So with that, that left us with a sample of 123 incidents that involved 132 people arrested. So we had some incidents where more than one person was arrested for 148 stemming from the same encounter. And this sample represented 35% of all the 148 arrests made during the period that we were reviewing. So as has been mentioned by the Inspector General, our review was primarily qualitative. We wanted to look at not only the qualitative in nature. So again, it's not a statistical review. It's not a technical audit in any sense. This was a qualitative review. Although, as you can see, we did provide some relevant statistics from the sample in the report. So in conducting each review, we, in terms of the materials that we looked at the arrest report, we looked at any in-car video or body-worn video that was available. We also looked at the watch commander log entries, the city attorney's disposition of the case, and then any use of force or complaint investigation that resulted from the incident. And in terms of what we evaluated, we first looked at the officer's adherence to the applicable laws and department policies that applied in the instance, and then we looked at the quality of the overall interaction. This is really the qualitative assessment. And what we were looking for here, we looked at whether officers used de-escalation techniques when they could, and also the extent to which the principles of procedural justice, that's a tongue twister, were exhibited by the officers during the encounter. So with that, I'll hand it over to Camelia to discuss our findings and recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Camelia?
Good morning, Commissioners. As the Inspector General noted, we did not identify issues in the majority of the incidents that we reviewed, but there were a number of cases that we found could be improved in one or more areas. Before I go over those areas, I want to emphasize that just because we found an issue in a particular case did not mean that the arrest itself was problematic. However, our goal was to use each case as a lens to review the entire interaction and look for areas of improvement. First, we looked at the justification provided by officers for any detentions, searches, or other actions taken during the encounter. We noted a small number of cases where we had concerns about the written justification for one or more of these steps. We also noted some cases where the associated report did not clearly document those decisions or why they were made. In such cases, the lack of information made it difficult to determine whether those steps were appropriately taken. Second, we looked at any associated use of force. We found that a little over half of the incidents we reviewed involved a use of force, and we noted a few cases where we had concerns, particularly about the use of the taser or the limited use of de-escalation techniques. As we note in the report, the department has already been working on these issues, and our recommendations have to do with continuing that process. Third, we looked at the arrest itself. Here again, we identified some cases where we had concerns about the arrest. In some cases, that was due to decisions that were leading up to the arrest, and in others, it was because the person's actions, as described by the officers in the report, did not appear to meet the elements of 148 PC. We also looked at the court dispositions for each arrest and found that about 35% of the available cases resulted in a filing for 148 PC. Here again, I want to emphasize that a decision not to file does not necessarily mean that the arrest was problematic, as many of the cases were declined in the interest of justice or for other reasons such as parole or probation status. Our recommendations in this area have to do with training officers and the city attorney's filing guidelines to help guide their decision-making in this area. Next, we looked at each incident in terms of procedural justice, which is a concept that was recently adopted by the Commission as a guiding value for the department. As you may recall, procedural justice has to do with how a person is treated during an encounter, and whether they were treated with respect and dignity. We looked to see whether they were given the opportunity to be heard and whether officers were able to provide explanations for what they were doing. Here we noted many cases where this was done well as some cases where those dynamics could have been better. Our recommendations in this area have to do with ensuring that procedural justice is an aspect that's considered by watch commanders in their review. Finally, we were asked to take a closer look at 148 arrests with respect to homelessness. We found that about 29% of the incidents we reviewed involved a person experiencing homelessness, and about a quarter of those incidents were initiated due to a violation related to that homeless status. For example, like a tent-related violation or sitting on the sidewalk. The concerns we noted in these cases were similar to those regarding people who were not homeless, but were in some cases more pronounced. Based on all of these findings and following discussions with the department and other stakeholders, we have developed the following recommendations for your consideration. First, that the department review its training on certain types of pedestrian, drunken, public, and trespassing codes to ensure that officers understand and are able to properly articulate the elements of those violations. Second, that the department requires sufficient documentation and articulation regarding the basis for any detentions, handcuffing, searches, or other post-stop actions taken during an arrest. Third, that the watch commander review process be strengthened and structured to ensure that it includes an evaluation of any search and seizure conducted during the incident, as well as any efforts at de-escalation, and that watch commanders take appropriate action when necessary. Fourth, that watch commanders be required to assess officers' use of procedural justice tenets during the encounter. Fifth, that the department analyze stop data for any potential concerns or patterns related to the use of handcuffing, pat-downs, or consent searches. As the Commission may know, the department recently began collecting expanded stop data in July 2018, which will allow for further review of these arrests and stops. Sixth, that the department further examine the use of the taser to ensure that it's not being used for compliance purposes. Seventh, that the department further examine 148 arrests of persons experiencing homelessness, including looking at the underlying offense, the rate of force used, mental health status, and the use of de-escalation during these incidents. Eighth, that the department work with the city attorney's office to train officers on filing guidelines for 148 PC. And finally, that the department expand its audits or inspections related to 148 PC arrests to include a review of stop justification, documentation and articulation of the basis for post-stop activities, and the quality of watch commander reviews. And with that, we're happy to answer any additional questions you have about the report or the recommendations.
Okay. Chief, again, any other recommendations that you want to discuss? I know these are really in line with your feeling about as far as homelessness and some of the other issues, but
I would just give Commander Rodriguez an opportunity, if you would, to see if there's anything else you'd like to add to this.
Absolutely. Good morning, Commissioners.
We
Mr.
don't have to, absolutely. I mean, it's just a matter of if you find something meaningful to add to this, go ahead.
Yes, we do. And what we like to do is give you an insight. Give you an insight on what we're going to be doing with some of these specific recommendations. And again, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to the Inspector General for allowing us the opportunity and have input into this whole process to validate all these recommendations, which we freely accept. And it gives us an opportunity for growth and opportunity and better train our officers to make us a better organization. So what we've done with these 9 recommendations, we've lumped them into 5 different categories because some of them do have some similarities that we can take care of. For instance, the first one, it's in relation to officer training. That belongs to recommendations 1 and 2. And what we're going to do with those 2 is the effective use of roll call periods. The watch commanders will deliver training modules to reinforce our officers' understanding as it pertains to 148, jaywalking, drunk in public, those various sections that the Inspector General discussed as where we can enhance our knowledge. Training Division is also working with our ability with the body-worn and digital in-car video and obtaining relevant videos which Our officers could have done things different, or our officers did things right. And we're going to utilize those videos in roll call training, in training days, at detective squad rooms, any place where we have a gathering of our employees. We're going to utilize those videos to show them, exemplify what a good incident was, or what an incident where our actions could have been different. We're also going to recirculate a couple of orders that were dated. One was back in 2011, one in 2006. The first one is the Office of Operations order that specifically deals with handcuffing protocols. We want to recirculate that to all our members. We also want to have the watch commanders put them in the rotator so they can be read at all roll calls for 5 days. We want to reinforce what the handcuffing procedures are, when to handcuff, when not, and just make sure that the officers get a refresher on that piece. The second one is a training bulletin, issue 38, dated back in April 2006, which specifically deals with legal contacts with the public. And this one kind of also addresses the procedural justice that we just discussed. And it also talks about the difference between a consensual encounter, a detention, reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and all the other things that go in our officers dealing with the public. The second piece is also in the training piece, and now specifically more towards watch commanders. On this one, every supervisor that is assigned as a watch commander currently attends a 40-hour course on watch commander procedures. During that week, they are going to have a specific block of instructions on one of our special orders from 2012 as a result of the consent decree that specifically deals with the evaluation of arrest for interfering, resisting, or assault on an officer. In addition to that, we are putting together a notice that is going to provide the watch commanders additional clarification where they don't only have to review the circumstances, but they also have to watch the relevant video. Every single command uniformed officer that is out there in the streets working enforcement is now equipped with a body-worn video, so we do now have that capability. And all watch commanders will have that mandate in addition to the normal review that they would do for training, tactics, and so on and so forth. And in addition, this notice will specifically deal with the procedural justice. We want to make sure that our watch commanders are cognizant of the fact that that is very important to our organization, very important to the chief, and is very important to our success as a whole. So we want to make sure that they not only review the video for some of the important tactical, procedural stuff, but also for how was the treatment with the encounter between the officer and the citizen. The third part is in the audits portion, and that goes to the fifth recommendation that the Inspector General made. And as she stated, AB 953 was recently implemented on July 1st, 2018. However, we have been collecting data since the implementation of the consent decree, and we will be looking at those. So right now, we are working with Audit Division. I know that they are working towards developing their 2019-2020 audit plan, and one of the fields that they're going to be looking at is the analysis of this type of information. They're currently working on a methodology, which we will work closely with. In addition to the work that they're going to be doing, our own audit team is going to go out and analyze this data as well to ensure that we are complying not only with the law as stated, but our own internal protocols are also being followed as far as procedural justice and some of the other concerns that we've had here as far as race, homelessness, and stuff like that. The next one is the examination of the 148 PC, and that one,
Number 7.
number 7, and that is, yes, that is number 7. One of the things that we've had difficulty with is really truly getting to which reports involve homelessness or not. We had to depend on what's written on the report. To combat that, we've ordered 52 stamps that have specifically homelessness on it. So anytime there's an incident that involves a homeless person as a victim, as a suspect, as a witness, or as other, we're going to ensure that that report, whether it's an arrest report or an incident report, gets stamped appropriately so that it gets processed, it automatically becomes identified as a homeless and we can code it correctly. So as we query our database later and we're doing our analysis, we can ensure that we have not only a quantitative but a qualitative process so that we can actually look and see what's going on in the homeless community. Our citywide homeless coordinator, I know this is an evolving area, our Commander Dominic Choi. He is currently evaluating this process. He's currently evaluating our actions as it relates to the homeless community. And he will provide a single-purpose addition to the third quarter report on homelessness in this area. The last one is a next one is taser utilization. As you know, the initial taser training bulletin that was circulated in 2015, we've had a lot of discussions, and we just had a recent modification to that, which was circulated on July of 2018. Since that, I think we have a very clear protocol as to when the taser can be used and when not. There seemed to have been some confusion in the beginning and interpretation when the first one was circulated back in 2015. I think we're in the right path now. We're making great strides to ensure that our officers do know exactly when a taser is allowed versus when it's not.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there has been quite a status change with taser and accessibility for officers. Now all officers are required to carry tasers. Before there was just one in the trunk of the car and et cetera. Is that correct?
That is correct. And if you can recall, we had incidents where the taser was not accessible or only one officer was equipped with it. Now every officer does have their own taser assigned, and they do carry it on their belt for quick
So
accessibility.
the additional training is really important now.
Exactly,
Yeah.
correct.
Got it.
And last but not least is a city attorney feedback protocol, and this goes as to recommendation number 8. This is something that we're working very strong with the city attorney to develop to develop the protocol for our officers to get the feedback when a case is rejected or when a case is filed, for that matter. Right now, we don't have that capability. That data is only entered into a computer database that has restricted access by certain individuals, so that doesn't always get down to the officers. So we're going to be working with our court liaisons, with our detective support vice division as well, to make sure that we work with the city attorney closely and develop that feedback mechanism so our officers can get it, as well as the leadership. So that way their captains, their sergeants, their watch commanders can see what that feedback from the watch commander or from the city attorney is. In the meantime, as we develop that mechanism, one of the things we're going to do is get all our neighborhood prosecutors that are currently assigned to the areas, provide roll call training. That was something that was done before, and it worked very effectively, and allowing the officers the opportunity to ask questions as to the necessary elements that are needed to be included in order for it to get a filing. We did that training once upon a time, and it was very successful. So we're going to freshen that up. We're going to work with our city neighborhood prosecutors and deliver roll calls and retrain on officers on the proper 148 elements to be included in the arrest report.
Great.
And that concludes my report. I'm ready for any questions.
Great. I've gone through my questions, and so have you gone through my questions, so go on.
Well, I really appreciate all of that, Commander Rodriguez. I would just want to commend you on an extraordinarily thorough response to this. It's just very obvious in everything you're saying, and the serious steps that you're taking to address this, and your entire demeanor. I mean, there's just not any defensiveness. There's clearly a strong commitment to improvement, and I really want to commend that. As with this, is something that we all take seriously, and acknowledge that these are particularly difficult situations that officers are in. I understand that on an individual basis, continuing to improve in particularly these difficult situations is a challenge, and I know that the department's undergoing a number of improvements right now, and so this just implementing everything you said today, not to mention everything we come up with every week, is a heavy lift, and I know that will take time, and I know that it's difficult. I would like to have you both come back in 6 months, if you can, to report on both the progress that you've made in implementing the recommendations, assuming they're adopted by the commission, that the Inspector General has made, as well as the additional recommendations that you just laid out, Commander. So a report both on the implementation, but also on the further examination, of which there are many areas to further examine, and to the President's point about now we have cameras on every officer, so we'll be able to have a wider view of these incidents as they take place across the department. And just a couple other points I want to make, and I look forward to hearing from the community on this. One of the reasons I care about this is because I have received complaints from members of the community about these incidents, and so we continue to be informed and our work is improved by input from people out on the front lines. But in addition to the concerns I raised before about disproportionate impact and bias, and particularly impact on people experiencing homelessness, this does touch on a number of other issues that are very important to the commission and to the new chief in terms of procedural justice and legitimacy and trust, particularly trust in African American communities. And we can see here that this is a clear area where we can improve in this area, and therefore I think improve legitimacy and trust in African American communities. We've also expressed a lot of concerns about complaints, and we know that improving procedural justice, there's a relationship between complaints and procedural justice, and so I hope to see that addressed. I hope to see that positive result of this as well. I think that's enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Bonner?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One, there was some information, I think it was around page 9, that generally speaking, I got the impression that a lot of these, or at least a disproportionate number of these incidents, involved young people, or at least relatively young people. And one question is, all of the recommendations that were discussed also speak to the training and behavior on behalf of the officer involved. Is there anything, and now I'm speaking again to the relatively discrete issue of young people and how they engage with law enforcement, is there anything that the department is doing or can do on that side of the equation through either community engagement or others that speaks to young people as to how you engage with law enforcement? And that's not to make a judgment as to how any incident evolves, but it is the question of just what do we do on that side of the equation also to help people avoid even getting into these kinds of situations?
Absolutely, Commissioner. And first and foremost, we start with our very robust youth programs that we have within the organization. Our cadet program is our flagship, where we bring young kids into the organization, and we teach them a variety of topics. We socialize them. We have them have that interaction with the officers. We also have a variety of programs such as our PALS, Police Activities League. We have our Jeopardy. So we have a lot of programs within the youth so that we can attract. In addition to that, if they don't want to come into the organization, which we understand, there's some challenges, we also work closely with our neighborhood youth groups that are external. Our senior leads go out onto these meetings. We do have, we go into the high schools where we have interactions with these young men and women. We do discuss interactions with the contacts, what to do, what not to do, what the expectations are. We do have several videos that we have shown to some of these high school kids. So our outreach is ongoing, not only with the high schools, the churches, anywhere where there's a youth group. We always engage and encounter and have that conversation with them as to what expectations are, what is appropriate, what is not. If you do A, this will be B. So we give them a lot of examples, and we do show them some videos, and we do some things to educate them also as well, so that we can have a positive encounter in the event of an officer in one of these youth groups, as you can see, occurs.
So when you come back in the 6 months to report further, if you could just comment on what, if anything, further by way of recommendation can be done in that area. And so I'm generally aware and appreciate the fairly lengthy list of programs and activities that you mentioned. And I would just wonder, and the other thing I observed was in this area, a lot of these incidents emerge from what was referred to as quality of life issues, right? People, especially young people, you can imagine drunk and just having fun, and some trouble emerges. So in any event, I would like to at least just have some comment. I don't know that it warrants any particular recommendation or not, but I'd appreciate a further comment on what we can do on that side of the equation. The other question related to one of the early points about the sample that was looked at here, and the fact that this sample included only those cases that where there was some video available. How meaningful was the video in the assessment in these cases? I mean, was it a prominent part of the review?
I would say extremely.
So what really does it tell us then if there's a whole other universe of cases where there is no video? What is that? I think what I'm asking is, is it's good work, and it appears to be a good start on a review. I'm just wondering how much it really tells us if there's a whole other universe of cases where you don't have the video and you don't really know what the situation is.
Yeah, I think we worked with what we had, and I think since that time, more video has been rolled out. And so I think if you were to do this report again, you would have more video, and you would have more insight into exactly what you're referencing, the universe of cases that we didn't look at. But I think that the short answer is we have more video now.
Well, I think, yeah, but I think what I'm asking also is, have we come to a point where the video rule, where we're only going to focus our attention on those things that we can see on video?
So one of the enhancements that the body-worn video and digital car video has provided to us is the ability to review not only in a 148 case, but in every contact, every arrest, every engagement that we have with the public. Our watch commanders during the review process, our training coordinators, our captains, our lieutenants, everyone is not only looking at those videos now from the issue at hand or the arrest or whatever the contact was, but we're looking also for procedural justice. We're looking for treatment. We're looking for all those areas where our officers are still not performing in the manner that I would do or a tenured member of the organization. And we utilize those as training opportunities, kind of with one of the recommendations that we talked about with training division, pulling those videos with the positive and cases where they could have been different. So we're really taking that capability now and expanding our review beyond the 148, and we're looking for all kinds of, whether it's a tactical training, whether it's an encounter, a procedural justice issue. So we're really looking at those videos from a global perspective to learn everything that we can and better enhance the performance of our
But
personnel.
you understand my question is that's excellent when you have the video, right? The question is are we already, and of course I'm the new kid, so I get to ask or preface a lot of my questions in that context, but are we already in an era where if it's not on video, we just don't really have an effective way of assessing it and looking at it in the same way, or is there another approach to those situations where the video is not available for whatever reasons?
Yeah, Commissioner, so two things. I think that the first is that we do have video available for 99% of all of our uniformed officers that will be making contacts. The policy as it's written and the practices that you turn on that video before you're making contact with someone in a law enforcement capacity. The only division that's in a uniform capacity that currently does not have, the only unit is SWAT, and they're in the process of getting that implemented within the next 60 days or so. So we won't have that situation where you won't have video. Now, if there's a circumstance where the video isn't turned on for whatever reason, there's a very robust look into whether it's a critical incident or not, and there's disciplinary that potentially can be imposed, whether it's a deploy comment sheet, notice to correct, or a complaint investigation.
Commissioner, I'd only add that your point's well taken, and we have examined this area over the last 2 decades without video or with only having other witness accounts and or outside video. I think this effort by relying on video in this subset of a subset offers an insight into this area. But there's a lot of caveats. I think I respect the Inspector General's office calling out that there's a limit to what this is telling us today. What we're looking at it as it's just one view into the prism, and it gives us an opportunity to come back and discuss with the Commission a host of aspects of what we're doing basically in every encounter between an officer and an individual in the field. Mm-hmm. And how does that encounter work? How does it not work, and how do we ensure that our actions of our officers are professional, providing dignity, acting in a procedural justice manner? But the video aspect today gives us one lens, but to your point, it doesn't tell us everything, and we have to rely upon other inputs as well. And then even then, though, we're still going to be limited into what we're doing. One last thing I want to add on going back to your youth programs. I'm really proud of the Oscar Joel Bryant Society, or Oscar Joel Bryant Association. It's an employee-based organization, and they have taken it upon themselves to begin a series of Know Your Rights seminars as we move into 2019 with particularly young African-American males as a means of improving the dialogue and also the perspective of law enforcement affirming that people have rights, and this is much in the vein of what the ACLU has done and NAACP and other organizations for decades. And so we are engaged in those type of individual efforts, as well as Cops and Kids and the Brotherhood Crusade coming and us working with them and them working with us. But we will put the array of those in our response back to you. It is a critical element as we exit this year and go into 2019, that we continue the engagements, particularly in communities of color, that demonstrate respect and an honoring of rights of everyone involved. And expectations, because it is a balancing act, that while people can feel unjustly accused or that the efforts of the officer were biased because of some societal issue or otherwise, there's also a responsibility of that individual to cooperate with that investigation and allow it to take its course. And should there be an assertion later that their stop was inappropriate, that then we pull a supervisor, allow an investigation to take place. But what's critical is that in that process, in that engagement, and what has been absent here is that when the officer and the individual they're working with are not cooperating, then that puts us in a very bad situation where the officer is trying to struggle with how do they gain cooperation and at the same time allow the individual to use the least amount of force or no force at all. And that whole dynamic, I think, again, this has been an opportunity to look into it, see it, find some areas that we need to improve upon, areas of watch commander oversight and engagement of a third party coming in and looking at the dynamics of what happened and determining should we press on with a pursuing prosecution on this, or should we instead recognize this as a learning point and fold our cards as far as that and arrest and move forward with how we can work perhaps better the next time.
Thank you. And just also to clarify, I think what I heard on the video is that I think we can all accept you can only do so much relative to the past, so to speak. But I think I heard you say that steps are taken so that going forward you really will have that important piece of evidence or information in almost every case. So,
Yeah, and additionally, one of the things that we had started previously that we're going to, after this report, continue to work with is working with the Inspector General's office to identify those specific items that would ensure that we agree is a procedural just process within the detention or the encounter. Whether it's giving out a business card or coming up with some items that are specific that we all agree to are going to be, we can say whether it's on video or not, in terms of an audit or inspection, that we did the right thing because of these 5 or 6 elements. And we're still in those discussion phases. It started a year ago, and we'll move forward with those now having this report completed.
Excellent. Thank you.
Commissioner, if I could, so just from the OIG's perspective, as far as our review protocols go, we certainly consider that type of video evidence, and we're pleased that I think the department, what they presented, that there's going to be few and far between cases where that won't be a piece of evidence that we can rely on. I think that makes our reviews better. However, and from my perspective at least, and from my staff's perspective, we certainly treat video as one of many pieces of evidence. It is not the entire story and shouldn't be the entire story. Officers' accounts, written reports, other available evidence is always a factor for us. As has been mentioned a couple times in this case, when we did our selection, really trying to focus in specifically on the nature and character of certain interactions guided us towards saying we want to focus more heavily in cases where there are video, understanding that that's going to take us away from sort of a global look department-wide. Early on in my introduction, I mentioned that OIG is well equipped to do both more quantitative, traditional audits of that style, as well as qualitative audits. This one leans more toward the qualitative. We already are in the very early stages of working on a more quantitative audit. It has its own selection decisions that we've made there too, and it's more broad as far as it does not limit itself just to 148 PC arrests, but stops of many kinds, although it does limit it to certain special units within the department where we think that is potentially a problem area. But That one will also rely heavily on video, but not quite in the same way that this one really depended on it for us to see these particular interactions. That will be more of a quantitative audit where videos there are great, but if not, that's okay too. We want to see the numbers of times when things are going well, things are going poorly. So we try to sort of just mix around our skill set and what the evidence is available, not just rely. We're only doing audit when we've got the sort of video to back us up. That's not quite the tack we take. It seemed better for this particular one, but in future audits it may not be.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any public comments on item number 2A?
Yes, sir. We have 8 comment cards.
Okay.
The first 3, Pete White, Jonathan Foster, and Adam Smith.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. Pete White with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. I find it interesting that we keep leaning on this is a qualitative, not quantitative analysis, but it's very clearly a mixed method analysis. The other thing that I find really problematic, both from Mark P. Smith, the Inspector General, and his staff, continues to say, did not find major areas of concern, right? That comment, that statement, full stop, diminishes the extent to which race informs policing tactics and discretions. Clearly lifted by the data that you've produced for us, right? Out of all 378 arrests for resisting arrest that took place from June 2016 to March 2017, 36% of folks arrested were black, right? 49% of women arrested were black and 33% of men arrested were black. And black people only comprise 8% of the total population. That is a major concern. In the OIG sample, it showed that 18 of the 28 women arrested were black and 0 of the 28 women arrested were white. How is that possible? You had a question earlier about geography. You did not come back to that. I was wondering why. When you looked at the spread of where the arrests had taken place, they were largely in communities of color, right? When you got into the valley areas, there were not that many arrests, and so we see that police officers are using their discretion in communities of color. I had a few more places, and I got a few more seconds. The other things that were interesting, 58% of houseless folks arrested were black. The thing that we should really be concerned about is uses of force connected to the 148s. Approximately 69% versus 47% of folks when houseless experience use of force. And so these are very serious. These are, as you call them, not major areas of concern. From the community's perspective, are huge areas of concern.
Thank you, Pete.
Jonathan Foster.
Mr. Foster?
Hi, Jonathan Foster. My comments can only be in addition to providing awareness. So I'm not going to be able to change anything. And many concepts can be applied to many of these agenda items and police issues that I've talked about. And I didn't read the report, so at this time, my comments are genuine and unbiased to what is written. The angry mob concept, if you took somebody's bicycle and they got their 25 friends and they come over and broke your face and just about killed you, that's why we have a police department. No one likes being inappropriately touched, and especially being arrested. And number 4 I have down here, this is the most important part. It seems that no matter what you do, if you don't want to be arrested, it's a death penalty for anything. So if you get in a fight with the cop, then you're dead. All you did was walk across the street. It's the death penalty for no matter what you did. I don't agree with this. You all do. Going for the gun. They go for the gun, and you take it. Oh, puppy went for the gun. Boom, 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 boom. He's dead now. I got my gun. We're still alive. I know if they almost really got the gun. How do we do with this? Got to insert here the taser is wrong because we're electricity, and so the taser interrupts the electricity in the human being. We can't have that in. Part of the remedy is having 6 to 8 to a team, which helps eliminate many of these issues instead of just 1 officer or 2 officers. If we had 6 officers there dealing with somebody that you may get into a big fight and then you end up having to kill somebody, which you never did have to kill anybody. Maybe if you had 6 or 8 at a team in a car or, and without video, there were times in the past when the officer stated, what the officer stated was a lie. And this has gone nationwide and worldwide. They just lied about, he did this, and so we got in a fight, and then we just killed him. and they were black. So it's a problem. It's a problem.
Adam Smith, followed by Gina Viola, Paula Miner, and Melanie Ochoa.
Pete already mentioned a lot of the numbers that were in that report, but it made me think a lot about the bias policing reports that we've come and looked at, and all of the, allegations of bias are always unfounded by the police department. And Pete mentioned the discretion of the officers, that these are obviously happening in communities of color, and the most frequent reason for folks being stopped was suspicious activity, like 13% of these stops. And you talk about discretion. Suspicious activity, according to an officer's discretion, could be running away. And when you're talking about a police force that shows up in these communities all the time, criminalizing people for nothing, criminalize people for being poor, and you're talking about a reason to further criminalize them is running away. It seems like a really shitty catch-22. One of the recommendations that you all mentioned was that the department further examine 148 PC arrests of people experiencing houselessness to identify the factors contributing to this rise. We know the contributing to this rise is because you're putting more police in the face of folks experiencing homelessness. We don't need more police in front of people experiencing homelessness. I think it's valuable that these are actually being looked at. I'm wondering if the OIG has looked at specific cases in this room of arrests using the 148 PC that have also been predominantly people of color, and specifically black women. And I think that's worth looking at because it just speaks to the bias of this police department.
Next.
Gina Viola.
Morning.
Good morning. I think it's very telling that you need video to determine what's going on out there. And the fact that you indicated next year this will look very different because you'll have more video. It means you don't trust your own officers to accurately report what's going on. Pete White mentioned not one white woman has been arrested for this stuff. And I can tell you that that happens here in this room. On May 8th, what happened here in this room? I was with Dr. Abdullah trying to exit this room. Your officers reached across me and grabbed her to be arrested. You wouldn't take me. So you can't control it going on here in this room. How are we to determine you're able to control it anywhere else? It's impossible. 66%, that's a D. That's a D. You determine 2/3 of these cases are in good standing, 1/3 is not. When my child comes home with a D, everything in my house stops. What happens when your children come home with a D? Everything gets taken away. Everything gets put on hold. Everything gets redirected to make sure that something happens to that. We just heard today, you get a D in this area. Everything needs to stop and be reevaluated and reassessed. It's not about having more of these reports, more consultants come in, take a look at it. Let's take another random sample of 200, some with video, some without. You know what's going on. You know this is broken. You know this is racist. You know it. You know it in the core of your hearts. So stop. Stop it.
Next.
Paula Miner, followed by Melanie Ochoa, Mr. Novick, and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Okay. Morning.
Good morning. Paula Miner with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, of course, supports any effort to reduce the impact of stopping people because they're homeless, criminalizing them because they're homeless, and then turning these things into an offense, in whether it's 148C or whatever. We understand that the first reason for being criminalized is because you're homeless. And, it just seems like this is a really strange dichotomy of the method to attack homelessness. The second thing I want to mention is that I would like the OIG to review the arrests that have occurred in this room and around headquarters when there is a commission meeting. And Black Lives Matter would like that time to include January 16th to the present, August 18th. In many cases, people have been arrested for interesting offenses such as objecting to Mr. Sobroff, speaking more than the allotted 2 minutes, standing up when they should be sitting down, speaking out when Mr. Sobroff felt that that was offensive. When the arrests occur, generally the charge gets reduced to a 148C. Then the city attorney has to make the decision based on the facts whether or not they're going to go through with this. In a lot of cases, they don't go through with the legal process, but the arrests do occur. I think it's important for the OIG. They could review all the arrests. I mean, I'm sure our sample, we don't need a sample. We need all of those arrests in this room reviewed. And we also need some interpretation. We've been arrested for filming. Filming ends up being an interference, and interference ends up being a 148C. So I would like the OIG to review the arrests that have occurred in this room.
Morning.
Melanie Ochoa, ACLU. One of the most significant findings in this report is the extremely low rate at which these arrests result in actual prosecutions by the city attorney, only 35%. It is good that discretion is being exercised to prevent people from being unnecessarily prosecuted. However, this commission should adopt and enforce policies that will limit the number of stops and arrests for minor violations or 148 charges in the first instance. An arrest is not a trivial matter, and in addition to the psychic and emotional harm caused, there are also tangible costs to being detained, including lost time and money to appear in court only to learn that no charges have been filed. There should not be a presumption of arrest merely because the very low bar for a 148 offense has been cleared. The department should also question the types of initial stops for very minor offenses that tend to result in these types of arrests and adopt policies that both limit arrests and the precipitating stops that do very little to increase public safety. Part of that policy should be ceasing to arrest individuals for noncompliance that is likely attributable to a language barrier, mental illness, or under the influence, which appeared to be over a third of the arrests in the sample. Also importantly, the data suggests that Black Angelenos, who make up 49% of the sample, are frequently arrested when their most serious offense is failing to completely comply with an officer's orders. If the department is taking seriously the criticisms of unequal policing, then a policy that reduces these arrests and the conditions that lead to them is necessary. And if the department adopts such a policy, there needs to be real enforcement, including through discipline against officers who engage in unnecessary arrests. As the IG noted, there is already a stated policy of limiting its enforcement against people experiencing homelessness, yet the number of 148 arrests for this population has increased by 59%. A policy is only as good as its enforcement, and if officers face no consequences for violating their training, direction, and the department's own stated goals, then these policies have not truly been adopted. I also want to point out a serious data limitation. We understand that this did not include cases where an individual was stopped, transported to LAPD station, and not formally arrested under LAPD policy because the watch commander determined not to do so.
Thank you.
Michael Novick, please.
Yeah, I want to point out a few things. You talked about quality of life policing as being part of the basis of this whole thing. And quality of life policing is part of the broken window school of policing. It's the idea that the quality of life of white, rich people is affected negatively by too many black, poor, and homeless people and brown people. And so the policing that's based on the quality of whose life. This is not quality of life policing, it's inequality of life policing. And so the other thing I want to point out is that if I walk up to you in the street and stop you and ask you for the time or for a light, there's no use of force involved. But as soon as a police officer walks up to you on the street, that's a use of force. You need to understand that when we walk into these rooms and people are traumatized by seeing police officers surrounding us with guns and tasers in the uniform, that's a use of force. This entire thing takes place under the use of force. And if you're blind to that, you're really blind. That's why we've asked you time and again to take these meetings out of this room, out of this building, into the public, into the community, where people feel a lot more comfortable and are freer to speak. I take it that based on what you talked about, that nobody interviewed any of the people who were stopped by the police. And so if you want to investigate the quality of the policing that you're doing and how it affects people and how they react to it, that would be the first thing you do, is talk to a few of these individuals who got stopped, the ones who were released, the ones who were arrested, the ones whose charges were dropped, and find out how they felt about that interaction. Every time I take an airplane or I buy something online, I get a customer service survey immediately in response. And they want to know how I felt about that interaction. But you don't give a shit about how people feel about interaction because you're not affecting their quality of life. You're concerned about the quality of life of the rich people who run this city.
And the last speaker, Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Yes.
Morning.
Morning. I was so glad for Pete White, Michael Novick, everyone that's spoken before me. I think, we're pushing the change, creating the change in this. It's white supremacy. It's white male Zionist supremacy. This is the order of the day. This is the status quo. In the last 15 years of attending these meetings, I've found that the statistics that you repeatedly cite and support are completely opposed and not representing what is happening in the street. Firstly, that is fraud. And the statistics, of course, which perfectly, I'm so grateful for Pete White, has exposed this. So we're pushing this change so that you either create an oversight committee where you are interviewing or taking consideration the fact that the majority of those who are being arrested are black, poor people, people of color, and your statistics consistently reflect this in trying to depict the white society as being blessed, cursed, the chosen people, if you will. Right, which is a Zionist Jewish approach, white supremacy, however you like to qualify that. In my last meeting, because I did speak, I was almost arrested. And, just because I was on topic, but Mr. Serbroth didn't like my words. This is not going to be population control, mass manipulation, which is what the New World Order has ordered you to do, and which is why these police officers are attacking us in the incrimination, the demonization, and the extermination of black people, people of color, or anyone that will not submit. As a black woman, I have been attacked by white women, not like this woman. But when I called the police because she thought I was too attractive, getting too much attention, still too much energy, whatever the reason of her insecurity, they would not arrest that white female, me, because they were not present. They said that we were both liable. So
Thank you. May we have
That is the last speaker, and for the record, the recommendation on this item should read approved the Inspector General's report.
Inspector General's report, and then you want to add the friendly amendment subject to?
Right, 6-month report back, and also just, I don't know if we have to adopt or just appreciate the department's additions.
Yeah, okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Go to item number, thank you very much. Let's go to item number 2B. Did we have any commissioner questions? Do we need a report on this? We want to go right to public comment. Let's go right to public comment.
Yep.
Do we have any public comments on item number 2B?
We have no public comments on 2B.
Can we have a motion for approval of 2B?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 2C. Do we have any commission comments on 2C?
No.
Do we have any public comments on 2C?
We have 2 public comment cards. We have Michael Novick and Jonathan Foster.
Okay, Mr. Novick? Sorry.
This is a report about best practices, and I think that it behooves us to think about that we have the department with the worst practices in the country. We have the department that's the most murderous police department in the United States year after year. And so if you're looking for best practices, I think avoiding the murder of people in the city would be one of the practices you would try to emulate. In the last report that we just heard, this went by too quickly, but it said that half of the cases of the use of taser and the incidents they looked at were for pain compliance to get people to follow with what the police wanted. That's a pretty foul practice. And so if you want to find best practices, I think that avoiding racially profiling the people of the city and avoiding the use of lethal force, because the taser is less lethal but is still lethal, to achieve compliance with an officer's requests or commands would be some of the practices you'd like to look for.
Hi. I just want to say again that there's always room for improvement, but I just want to say thank you for the 98% excellent service of the LAPD. Even though the 2% is always what we're talking about, and it's pretty gross, to be honest with you. Knowing that how the tax dollars are taken out of us by gunpoint, you don't pay your taxes, they're going to come for you. And then Congress takes all this money coming out of L.A. and then it goes to the Pentagon, and people like Dov Zakheim can't account for $1.2 trillion is gone. Oh, we don't know where we spent it, guys. Sorry. And it's like, well, no wonder there's so many homeless out here. And then I know Mr. Smith talks about that you guys are spending half the budget of L.A. on the LAPD, but if we're missing $23 trillion, my God, I mean, we need 6 to 8 teams of officers in one unit or 2 units going together. I know if you go through a red light, how are you going to keep them all together? But at least they're close, put on the lights and you can go through. This has to become a best practice. It really does. You can't just keep sending out 1 or 2 officers and then wait 4 minutes for backup. You got 8 people on the scene right now, and other people don't like that because they're talking about there are too many police officers. And I'm talking about saving people's lives. You want to talk about how to save these people's lives, even though they're giving the police officer a bunch of crap. I get that, but 6 to 8 people on the scene immediately with the resources they need could really save lives, where somebody can act out in dealing with the cop. I mean, if you signed up to be a police officer, you signed up to get beat up sometime. You have to accept that. You're going to get beat up. You accepted that when you signed up. Okay?
You might want to check your number. Your 50% number is 19%, not 50. Okay, we have a motion for approval of item 2C.
Motion to approve 2C. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to the chief's report. Chief, morning, sir.
Commissioners, good morning. Regarding significant instances, I'd like to just report on 3 public events that I attended this last week, and then one coming up. And this is obviously in our efforts of continuing to build trust, being visible and accessible. This last Friday, I was a panelist on the Loyola Law School Policing Forum. It dealt with policing under Senate Bill 54, and I was joined by, actually it was moderated by former Police Commissioner Kathleen Kim. She sends her regards. And on the panel was ACLU Michael Kaufman, as well as a professor from Irvine and a few others. I was also joined by Assistant Sheriff Eddie Rivera from LES. So in talking about the panel, a couple-hour panel was enjoyable, and being able to recount the efforts of the department in the last 40 years in our operating practices, the evolution of Special Order 40, our work with immigration advocates, and including the most recent, evolution or changes within the manner in which we deal with all of our immigrant communities, and our continued commitment to remain in discussions on this very active topic. We also had yesterday a meeting with the Jewish Federation and a number of non-government organizations and stakeholders within our Jewish community, and met last night in the Mid-Wilshire District and spent a few hours there speaking about matters of concerns within the various Jewish communities in Los Angeles and their partnerships and shared responsibility for the safety of Los Angeles. And then tonight we have a Latino Forum, Chief of Police Latino Forum, be held at the Reef at 1933 South Broadway, and again we'll continue those conversations relative to again matters of our public safety, the goals and ambitions of the department in achieving that end result. And want to move over to crime statistics. And year-to-date, as I do each week. This last week, we saw, again, a further improvement in our shooting violence particularly. We're now down 5 fewer homicides this year to date versus last, 169 versus 174. As I will often say, that there's still too much shooting violence in this city, but I am encouraged that we have seen an August where we are actually even this month versus last year this month, and that was not, this summer was not developing that way. We had a difficult June and July particularly, and we saw some erosion of our earlier gains. As we in this last weekend, we have 1,927 fewer Part 1 crimes for a 2.3% reduction, and that again includes 63 fewer victims of shootings. Our gang crime is down 12% year to date. That's 360 fewer gang crimes, and our officer-involved shootings. As of this morning, we have 24 officer-involved shootings year to date. Last year, that number was 35. For a 31% reduction. And our calls for service, as I've indicated before, continue to rise this year versus last. We ended July with 35,570 additional radio calls versus the same period last year. In regards to our traffic statistics, our challenge continues to be in bicyclist-involved collisions. We have had 10 fatal bicycle-involved collisions this year versus 7 last year. And so we have seen that improve somewhat in the last 2 months as far as that ratio, but it is still far too few people, or far too many people have lost their life or been seriously injured on a bicycle.
Chief, do we have a separate category for the scooters, for the whatever those things are called that people are zooming around?
Scooters, I think, is the technical term, but.
Is that included in bicycles, or is it? Where is it?
You know, that is a great question. I'll have to get that answered. It's a motorized device, so I don't know if they consider it a motor vehicle because of that little electrical matter. I am encouraged by hearing just this last week that many Angelinos are using these and practicing safe scootering with helmets, I understand, from one particular commissioner. So but I want to draw out that in motor vehicles versus pedestrians or motorized vehicles, that we're basically flat this year versus last as far as serious injuries and deaths. But back to the scooter conversation, I make a little bit of light with it. It is an emerging technology with Los Angeles. It is something I think that has an opportunity of allowing us to be, as a mobile society, take advantage of this type of technology, but it also has a very significant risk to public safety. Just last night, as an aftermath of the Jewish Federation meeting, I was visited by former Board of Supervisors Zev Yaroslavsky, who informed me that he works with one of the facial reconstruction expert surgeons in Cedars, and that each week, at a minimum, 2 to 3 victims of scooters he's seeing, and he represents about 20% of the surgeries in Cedars for matters of those type of facial injuries. So this issue of the law requiring all operators that these operations be on the street, that they be mindful of other traffic, including pedestrian traffic, that they be lone individuals and not buddied up with children or others in a shared sense, and that they be helmeted and have safety equipment such as gloves and other type safety equipment are real issues. And many times we witness and observe people moving around the city, enjoying their afternoon, a summer day, and having a wonderful time, but without a helmet, without proper safety protections. And while we see the masses seemingly having a wonderful time, there is an undercurrent, and a significant one, that I think Supervisor Yaroslavsky pointed out, which is there's a casualty rate to these. So we just encourage, from an education standpoint, and seeking the compliance and the safety of everyone who operates these, to do so responsibly. And of course, I look forward to, as I know others, to our city elected officials as they work to develop ordinances and controls so that the business of these scooters is administered properly.
Yeah, Chief, I just want to ask you one more question about that, because I think
to answer your question, I will also follow up to figure out where in the categories that lies, and just so you have a city attorney on your shoulder.
She was just telling me to continue.
Okay. Right. Yes, sir.
People are getting much better at it, and because they're getting better at it, it's getting more dangerous. And my question is, how does somebody find out what the rules actually are, what you can do and can't do?
Well, we will, if I do not have that on our lands, we will make sure that we post frequently asked questions relative to the responsible use.
Okay.
It is a motorized vehicle, much as a motorcycle, and operating it has the same requirements as my understanding. But again, it's a good point. If we don't have that posted, we'll have that and certainly get you a copy should you choose to engage in that activity.
She told me I was off topic, but it was just a warning. The second time I would be out, just like anybody else.
If I might move over to the last portion, and that is our sworn personnel and civilian personnel stats. On sworn personnel payroll, 9,986 personnel. Our civilians are 2,969. Our reserve officers are at 397. I want to report that in speaking with Chief Grimala just yesterday, we have a reserve class scheduled for November. So those that are interested in joining the police reserves are encouraged to submit their application. We're looking to build a robust class that would add to these ranks. And finally, our cadet Corps is at 1,428 individuals, and that concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
Any commissioner questions of the chief?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to take this opportunity to ask the department to prepare a report. As you know, I've become aware of a program in San Francisco and one in Eugene, Oregon, where these local jurisdictions have figured out a way to divert calls coming into law enforcement related to people experiencing mental health episodes, and have been able to divert those calls to a more appropriate social service response when appropriate and when possible, when it doesn't require a law enforcement response. So I'd like to ask the department to look into the two programs that I found and any others you might find, and see whether there's anything that we can learn from those programs, whether there's anything we might be able to apply here in Los Angeles in terms of reducing unnecessary police response to incidents and increasing a social service response. There were some, as we discussed, there are some kind of statistical questions that I would have just to help understand the degree to which we are receiving calls that may not require a law enforcement response and what the response is. But I understand from the chief that some of the statistical information gathering may slow down the process and be challenging. So I think the more important thing is to understand these other model programs and what we can learn from them, and we can talk about how we might gather data about what's currently going on in LAPD. But the more important thing is whether these programs are replicable here in Los Angeles.
So Commissioners, if I could ask for 45 days for the first portion, and as we research the manner in which to determine if we can call out from our 1 million calls for service those that have mental health aspects. I know we have a new CAD system coming on, but it's not coming on now until March. So we'll, if you can be 45 days on the first portion, we'll have our status on the other.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We have public comments regarding the chief's report.
Yes, sir. We have 4 cards. We have Michael Novick,
Mr. Novick.
Adam Smith, Jonathan Foster, and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a couple of items. One was your relations with the Jewish Federation. You should be aware there's a great deal of dissatisfaction in the Jewish community. I'm part of a group called If Not Now, which is Young Jews Against the Occupation. Very concerned about the Jewish Federation's lack of response to some of the killings that have taken place in Gaza. There's also a great deal of concern. I've worked with Jewish Voice for Peace, which is concerned about the role of Israeli law enforcement in training relationships with the LAPD. That agency is involved in a colonial type of policing and enforcing the occupation, and it's not the kind of training that the LAPD needs, because it reinforces the mentality that the LAPD is an occupying army and our communities here and should not be trained in those types and techniques of training. I also wanted to comment about the scooters. I gave my car away about 6 years ago. I get around LA on public transportation, bicycle, and on foot, and I find that the scooters are a tremendous public nuisance. The scooters themselves are left lying around the street, interfering with your access and egress from public transit stations on the metro lines. I got off the train the other day, and there was a man picking the scooters up, who blocked the traffic. He was in a left turn lane, parked his car, got out, and there was a scooter lying in the street blocking traffic in the other direction. I think if you spent 1/10 of the amount of time and effort that you do harassing the homeless, dealing with a significant health and public safety problem that scooters represent, but because those are privileged people with iPhones and credit cards and can hop on a scooter at will without a helmet, you don't think that that's a problem. You're a lot more concerned about poor people living on the street.
Next speaker.
So I think it's worth always kind of looking at what constitutes a significant incident for the chief's report. Several weeks ago, a man named Joe, who experiencing houselessness in Koreatown for the last several years, was displaced in an LAPD sweep. His heart medication was thrown away. A couple weeks after that, Chief Moore had a welcome reception that was put on by the Olympic Boosters Association. There was a sweep the day before that they didn't have the apparent 24-hour sheets out noticed. This man Joe got displaced again and died last week from a heart attack a month after his heart medication was taken away in an LAPD sweep. So I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like that's a significant incident. And as a colleague, Jed from LA Can mentioned last night that it's not an outlier. There were 831 deaths of unhoused people in 2017. And as we talk about, 148 PC and all these things that are disproportionately affecting houseless folks, we really need to think about, it's not just arrests and everything, it's death. And so, we speak to significant incidents every week here, and I think that Joe's death is a significant incident, and all the hundreds of people that are going to die this year on the streets of LA are significant incidents. Especially when they come from the result of policing.
So Adam, if you would, please, this is a sergeant here on my left. He'll meet you in the back of the room. I'd like to get more information relative to this individual that lost their, or as you indicated, lost his...
He's on video saying that.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested. I'm not aware of that incident, and I'm going to ask for us to investigate it. Thank you.
Jonathan Foster, please.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. Have some recordings to play on a KNX 1070. I recorded the interview. So this is one thing you said. I was elated. And you were elated that you got picked for chief of police. And then in the other part of the interview, you say this. At the same time, or men and women who have lost their life in the service of the city. 50 of those individuals have died and been killed since I've joined this department. So about 50 police officers, LAPD officers have died since you've been here. I need to know who was killed by an illegal alien. How many? Can you give me the answer?
He's not going to respond during this.
Okay. Well, we need a response because 50 have died of your people. They represent us. And I need to know how many of them were responding to an illegal alien and then they lost their lives because Special Order 40 killed those police officers, which is the same thing that you people seem to stand on. ICE and Immigration Customs Enforcement is a problem with that too, I agree. Homeland Security is a problem with that, but we have billionaires that tell the CIA and Homeland Security and ICE how they want the border and what drugs they want pumped into here, and they're making it all the way up to Connecticut and New Hampshire, and they're killing people up there, black people. And so also I have a taco, what is this thing here? It says... it was the taco people. They said that you had got a $1.27 million in January, but you and Eric the Toilet were charading us for months that he was trying to make a decision, yet it was already made in January. So you're a liar, and you need to get out of here. You cannot be the chief.
Next speaker, please.
We have Imam Michelle Autry, please.
Well, I do see, so many similarities in what's happening in Palestine, and then the occupation here in black areas, areas that are, of course, more economically challenged, oppressed areas. Of course, the homelessness in Los Angeles being completely engineered, using the homeless as sources of DNA, genetic experiments for food, for the vampires and the cannibals at the very top of the Illuminati, for energy, for those looking for sex slaves. That is engineered and is maintained even apart from the industry, which is the homeless industry, because very few of the service providers are actually giving the homeless the attention that they need per government granting and sourcing. So I'd like to expose that. Firstly, it's an extermination, but it's a sacrifice of those people, because the Luciferians need sacrifices, so they're sacrificing those people. So you maintain them accessible. It's an accessibility of the black people because of the melanin and because we're been labeled as sacrifices for these Zionist Jews, basically. So what I'm saying is, I know it's a very delicate situation, ideally, because until God cleanses this earth, we do have imbalanced, which is usually as a result of this Western civilization, the food, the white supremacy, the toxic environment. Not just the black people are experiencing, but all of us. But what I'm saying is, until that the criminal imbalanced or those that are not really being themselves has been healed, we need peace officers, again, not terrorists, in the guise of peace officers abusing, terrorizing, raping, and ritualistically sacrificing these people. So we need you to take it.
Okay, do we have any other speakers on this?
We have no other speakers on this item.
Okay, let's go to public comment.
Item number 4, we have 7 comment cards.
Does she have one?
Ms. Autry is on.
Okay, let's go with the public
First,
comment.
we have Michael Novick, Adam Smith, and Jonathan Foster.
You have a new member. This would be a good opportunity to stop having meetings inside the police administration building and conduct your meetings in the evenings out in the community in different parts of Los Angeles, so you can hear directly from the population of the city at large. You can see very few people are able to make it here, and a lot of people who would like to make it here have been enjoined from doing so because they're not allowed to come inside the police administration building. A lot of people, as I say, find this kind of traumatic to come inside surrounded by police officers. So I would urge you again, especially since Mr. Bonner has joined, it gives you an opportunity to start fresh and schedule new meetings for evenings in the community without being surrounded by a phalanx of police. I'd also like to comment on Mr. Bonner's participation. I understand that part of your qualifications was participating as a staff person on the Christopher Commission years ago, looking at the problems of the LAPD. And I just want to point out that the changes that were made by that commission really failed to deal with the problems that we're facing, because we're still facing them. The major change was the idea that the chief would be hired for a 5-year term, renewable for 5 years, and they did expose some of the racism of the computer communications and referring to cases of NHI, no human involved, in dealing with crimes between black people or brown people. But the fundamental problems continued. We still have the most murderous department in the country. Long after the commission, we had the Rampart scandal. We had the consent decree, and yet the problems persist. So I think that you're not looking at the roots of the problem because it continues. And so I would urge you to learn from that experience of your own and be a voice in this commission for dealing with the public in a different way.
Next speaker, please.
Adam Smith, followed by Jonathan Foster.
This Friday, Dr. Abdullah is going to court. everybody in this room, except for maybe Mr. Bonner, knows that the charge that she's being charged with was made in terribly bad faith. I don't know if Lieutenant Caldera left the room, but I'm just wondering if, with all the problems in the city that you all purport to be fighting, the department, like, I'm just wondering if, like, this division specifically, these folks that are in this room every week, like, do they go home and like, yeah, we got a good one today. We got that teacher that's always mouthing off to Mr. Soberoff. We got her good. Fighting crime, policing. Is that really the best use of taxpayer money, is criminalizing college professors that say things that this commission may not find nice? No one was assaulted. I'm just wondering, like, if they're, you know, I don't know which officer was supposedly assaulted, but is it like a proud moment to get a college professor to go to court, get charged with battery, get charged with assault, get charged with 148 PC like we're talking about today? Anybody that's related to that charge should be ashamed of themselves.
Okay, next.
Jonathan Foster. It's probably my last time down here because Father God is calling me into some other things. And I may return at different times. I protect the police department. If you did the things that I've suggested, there wouldn't be one police officer getting killed nationwide. It would not happen. The other thing I'd like to communicate to everybody is the reason why I try to know some of the laws and do it right is because I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you around me. This doesn't mean that I don't love you and respect you. I love you and respect you. I do. You commit a crime against another human being. I mean, you're gonna get some hell because humans act out on each other. But I don't want you around me, so I try to do everything right. So if you examine me, about this Mr. Foster guy, I didn't have anything to say. I couldn't find he was doing anything wrong. Well, what do you do when you're black? Oh, he was just standing on the corner. I thought he was maybe he had a gun, maybe he didn't. He had drugs or he didn't have drugs. Yeah, the one cop, they shot the guy in the head because he had his hands wrapped around a cloth, and they thought he had the gun. They tried to interact with him, shot him in the head. Now half of his head's caved in. This is why I don't want you around me. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. I do love you. But I don't want you around me. So I try to say, well, how do I make that happen? I got to do it all right. I got to be sure I stop here, walk this way, look that, say hello, blah, blah, blah. Because you get something going on in your brain, and then you're going to arrest me for something you got going on in your brain that's a bunch of, you got it? Now, I do love you, and keep up the great work.
The next two speakers, Zach Sherwin, Gina Viola.
I'd like to start by echoing what previous speakers said about the time and place of this meeting. I know so many people who are thoughtful, engaged members of the community who would like to come participate and see what goes on at these meetings who simply aren't able to because they work jobs with conventional schedules. This is a wild place to have the meeting.
Hold on, we'll stop the clock for a sec. Mr. T, thank you. Want to announce when the next, we do have meetings in the community, and we'll announce the next one for you so you can tell those people maybe they'd like to attend.
The weekly meeting.
Do you want to hear about the next meeting or no?
I want to say the stuff that I came to say.
You can.
Are there other ways for me to find out besides hearing from right now? Like, can I? I'm genuinely asking. I'm not being confrontational, but I would prefer to just keep going with the comments I prepared.
Yeah, go ahead.
Every other page of the 148 PC report is missing in the copies that I have. It's only the odd pages. So I just want to point that out, and I also just have to say it's not a great look. I wanted to say that I found it unseemly to start giggling about scooters in the middle of the list of crime statistics. Mr. Sobroff, I have to say your line of questioning about those scooters was the most animated that I've seen you during this meeting. And while scooters are an issue in our city, I certainly don't think it's the most important one that's been broached today. I can't read your mind, but it's difficult for me not to conclude that scooters are something you've actually encountered in your day-to-day life as opposed to the litany of statistics about arrests. I'm white too, and I don't live in those spaces where that's in my face all the time. I too have more interactions with scooters than I do those statistics, but I'm not on the Board of Police Commissioners. What else do I want to say? One other thing, Mr. Sobroff. I noticed that when Jonathan Foster said he hadn't read the 148 PC report, I heard you chuckle audibly. And later you told him that he might want to check his numbers in a peevish tone. It's just such a bad look for the president of the police commission to be behaving towards people who are making comments in that way. 2 minutes is such a short amount of time. We all have so much to say. I guess I'll close by saying that we've heard a lot of statistics today, but I don't want to forget the individuals that are impacted by the LAPD. Valerie Rivera is here most weeks. I see that she isn't here this week. Her son Eric was killed by LAPD in an egregious incident. The officer's conduct was found to be in policy. So I just want to say the name of Eric Rivera out loud in the room today.
Next speaker.
The next speaker, Gina Viola, followed by Jamie Garcia and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Hello again. Also echoing what we've been talking about, the weekly meetings do need to move. It's not enough to have 1 or 2 community meetings that you announce at the last minute to be held in an evening somewhere. That's not significant enough. The weekly meetings need to be held out in the community, away from this location, unpoliced by, we're outnumbered many times by officers. And the meetings are so long that your officers have to have break periods. So you have double the amount of officers just to patrol a meeting. I also wanted to bring up something back to the 148 issue. In approximately 1/3 of the cases reviewed, the OIG, Inspector General, identified 1 or more areas that could be improved. Again, those numbers are not great for me. These included incidents with insufficient documentation or articulation for the basis for the stop or other officer decisions, cases where there did not appear to be sufficient basis for 1 or more decisions, the use of profanity or other disrespectful language, the use of seemingly retaliatory threats, or a lack of transparency about why decisions were being made or actions taken. The OIG noted that in some cases, this appeared to escalate the incident and result in frustration on the part of detainees, possibly contributing to their noncompliance. That's 1/3. That's 33% of those cases experienced that. And that's of that small sample number that you took where you had video. Apply that across everything that happens in this department, 1/3. 1/3 of it is no good.
Next speaker.
Jamie Garcia.
My name's Jamie. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. So I wanted to address you, Mr. Bonner, since I realize this is your first meeting. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is because I see in documentation from public records requests that we've received over time that LAPD is very much into shaping cultural narratives about who people are, what they mean, how they act, even socioeconomic, sociodemographic matters as well. So we've been here, the coalition has been here for a little over 7 years. We've had issues about the suspicious activity reporting program, the drones that were acquired, body cameras, and recently predictive policing. So I'm not sure if I'm saying I want to invite you to a meeting, but I'm saying that you should really reach out in a sense to not only receive your information from the people that sit next to you up on that board. We've received emails in our public records requests, and we see how commissioners speak about constituents, people in this room. So I would suggest you do something different because their narrative they're going to shape is definitely very wrong. But I wanted to kind of recenter you back into July 24th. We had a hearing called Data-Driven Evidence-Based on Policing, and the coalition presented, LAPD presented, the OIG presented, and the ACLU presented. Within that, I realized the OIG is going to come back with an assessment of these programs. There's a plethora of programs, but he's focusing on laser and PredPol. But as we've been looking more into our public records request, we have an open lawsuit with LAPD because they failed to fulfill a public records request on the laser program. What I'm realizing is that LAPD is really into mapping and creating a cultural narrative. And just because I have 10 seconds left, it's really alarming to find out the kind of data mining that's happening in hotspots, down to socio-demographic data mining. And it's also very disturbing to see how LAPD speaks of poor communities as being not social cohesive and not having cultural efficacy. So
Next speaker, please.
The final speaker, Iman Michelle Autry.
Yes, I'd really like to support that practically because Stop LAPD Spying is doing so much. Hamid, Janie, everyone. Just for this record, again, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-evil. Okay? And again, because of this Western patriarchy, this civilization or this culture, which is God is destroying it. Right, and so this is your response in a last feeble effort to maintain control, which is what the New World Order is, and which is what the Illuminati is, and what is what your facial recognition, your SARs, which are completely unfounded, usually attacking those trying to create a change, maintain, and keep our souls intact. Again, it's white supremacy attacking black people and anyone that will not submit to this New World Order approach to maintenance of this status quo. Until, right, God cleanses this earth, we still have crime in the streets, so we need the good cops, right? You need to pay attention to our complaints because they identify the bad cops. It's very simple. And you regard, or you say that our complaints are completely unfounded. I'm against the drones because it's just a matter of time before they will be armed and they will be perpetrating even worse atrocities against those that you consider to be the most threatening, the problems to your status quo. I'm speaking right now, a lot of the Mexican, Hispanic immigrants, again, thinking I'm their sex goddess for their ladder and for their elevation, and they say that they are rewarded and they are under-ordered from the Mexican mafia, El Salvador, and Mala Salvatrucha, and also the Jews, because I hear them in Spanish telling me that they get rewarded for breaking down black women, and they want our internal organs for medication. And white women say that I'm consistently for research. Someone is ordering this.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
We have one comment card on closed session item 5A1. We
Okay.
have Mr. Novak.
Mr. Novak on 5A1?
Yes, sir.
We don't have any on 5A2?
No, sir.
Okay. This is 5A1.
Yeah, we're back to looking at officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, and we're about a year behind again. So these are from August of a year ago. I did have a question about one, which is, if I understand correctly, it's reclassified as an in-custody death. So I was curious how that happens, that somebody would die and it would not be classified as an in-custody death if they're in custody when they die. And then the other one is apparently a Hispanic man shot. I don't know if he was killed or just shot. So I was curious about both of those cases, if there's anything you can say publicly about them.
Okay, we have no other comment cards. The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items number 5A, 1, and 2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Shane was saying there was not enough, definitely not enough hazing in this first meeting, but I think that you got a little bit of everything. Yeah. What happened today was unusual.
Down here or
No,
up there?
upstairs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would hope so.
I think a lot of your hazing was gonna come from the guy I threw out, so I think you owe me a dime.
Okay, all right, all
I
right.
think he was warming up.
The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. The
Board's
executive,
actions in closed session as to item 5A1, the chief's recommendations were adopted unanimously 4-0. As to item 5A2, relevant to drawing, exhibiting, non-lethal use of force, less lethal use of force, and lethal force, the chief's recommendations were adopted unanimously. As to tactics, the findings of 1 sergeant, 1 police officer 1, and 3 police officer 2s adopted the chief's recommendation unanimously. As to the findings of 2 police officer 2s, the vote was 2-2, therefore no finding on those 2 police officer 2s. That concludes the report.
is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved? All in favor?
Aye.